Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a subject that really challenges the way we think about fairness.
Hmm.
You know, we grow up with this idea that in a fair system, everyone gets an equal slice of the pie. We think of democracy, right?
Right.
One person, one vote, one cell, one drop of blood. But today, looking at the physiology of circulation, it seems the human body didn't get that memo.
It certainly did not. If the human body were a democracy, where every single gram of tissue got the same amount of blood flow regardless of what it was doing, you would be unconscious in seconds.
Really? That fast?
Oh, yeah. And dead shortly after. The body is not a democracy. It is a ruthless meritocracy.
A meritocracy. That is a strong word for biology.
It's really the only word that fits. Blood flow isn't distributed equally. It's distributed based on appropriateness, on immediate need, and frankly, on the metabolic importance of the organ in question.
So it's a hierarchy.
Absolutely. And today we're looking at the VIPs of the circulatory system, the special regions.
And just to set the stage for you, we're pulling this synthesis primarily from two absolute titans of the field, Gannon's review of medical physiology and Guyton and Hall's textbook of medical physiology.
The cornerstones.
We aren't looking at chapter numbers because, you know, those change with every edition, but we're diving deep into the sections on circulation through special regions.
That's right. And our mission today is to explore how 4 specific areas, the brain, the heart, the skin, and the fetus, completely bend the standard rules of hemodynamics just to survive.
They don't play by the same rules.
They have their own laws. They write their own rule book.
Before we jump into the brain, which I know is the biggest diva of the bunch,
Oh, absolutely.
let's talk about this concept of regional variation. I was looking at the data from Gannon, specifically the tables comparing resting blood flow, and the differences are just, they're wild.
They're so telling, aren't they? It really highlights the difference between flow and extraction.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the kidney, for instance, it's receiving a massive amount of flow, about 420 milliliters per 100 grams of tissue per minute.
That sounds like a lot.
It's a fire hose. But the kidney isn't hungry in the metabolic sense. It's not using all that oxygen to, burn energy.
So why all the blood? What's it doing with it?
Because the kidney is a filtration machine. Its job is to process volume. It needs to see a huge amount of plasma to do its job of cleaning the blood.
So it's just skimming the top.
Precisely. The venous blood coming out of the kidney is still bright red. It has barely been touched in terms of its oxygen content.
Right, so high flow but low oxygen extraction.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with the heart.
The engine room.
The heart gets much less flow per gram than the kidney,
Yeah.
but it extracts almost every single molecule of oxygen it can get its hands on.
It's wringing it dry.
It's a metabolic furnace. The blood coming out of the coronary sinus, that's the main vein of the heart, is some of the darkest, most deoxygenated blood in the entire body.
And then you have the skin.
The skin is the wild card.
Why is that?
Its blood flow has almost nothing to do with its own survival. It's all about the temperature of the rest of the body.
It's a radiator.
It's a radiator.
Yeah.
So you see, fairness isn't the goal. The theme here is that the structure and the flow adapt to the function.
Form follows function.
Exactly. And nowhere is that more obvious or more critical than in our first special region, the cerebral circulation.
The protected fortress. Let's unpack this. You mentioned the brain as a diva. I think the stats back that up, but I want to understand why it's so demanding.
Well, let's just look at the cost of living for the brain. The adult brain is only about 2% of your total body weight.
2%? That's tiny.
It's tiny. It weighs roughly 1,400 grams. But despite being so physically small, it commands 15% of the resting cardiac output.
15?
And it consumes 20% of the total oxygen consumption of the entire body.
That is an incredibly expensive organ to keep running. 1/5 of every single breath I take is just for that 2% of tissue.
It is the most expensive real estate in the body. And unlike your muscles, it has zero tolerance for failure.
What do you mean by that?
If you stop blood flow to the brain, you don't have minutes. You have seconds.
Wow.
Unconsciousness occurs within 5 to 10 seconds of flow cessation.
Why is it so fast? I mean, my leg falls asleep if I sit on it wrong and I'm fine an hour later. Why doesn't the brain just pause?
And this brings us right down to the molecular level. Your leg muscle, it's loaded with glycogen. It can switch to anaerobic metabolism, creating energy without oxygen for quite a while.
Right. That's what causes the burn when you sprint.
Exactly. That burn is lactic acid from anaerobic metabolism. Your muscles are built for that.
But the brain can't do that.
The brain has almost no anaerobic capacity. It has very, very little glycogen storage. It is entirely dependent on oxidative phosphorylation to produce ATP.
So it needs oxygen constantly.
Constantly. And why does it need so much ATP? It's not contracting like a muscle. It's pumping ions.
The sodium-potassium pumps.
Millions and millions of them. Every time a neuron fires, you have to reset it. You have to pump sodium out and potassium in. That requires massive amounts of energy.
So no blood means no oxygen.
No oxygen means no ATP.
No ATP means the pumps fail.
And the whole system collapses. The membrane potential just dissolves, calcium floods into the cell, and you get what's called excitotoxicity. The neuron essentially works itself to death in seconds.
So because the stakes are so high, literally life or death of the neuron in seconds, the body has built in some serious insurance policies.
It has to.
The first one being the anatomy itself, right? The circle of Willis.
Circle of Willis is brilliant engineering, though it's often misunderstood.
How so?
Well, you have 4 major arteries feeding the brain, 2 internal carotids coming up the front of the neck, and 2 vertebral arteries climbing up the back.
And they don't just go their separate ways.
No, they all meet at the base of the brain to form this ring, this circle. It connects the anterior circulation from the carotids with the posterior circulation from the vertebrals.
It's like a roundabout for blood.
That's a perfect analogy. The entire idea is a redundancy. If one of your carotid arteries gets blocked, maybe by plaque or an injury, the circle theoretically allows blood from the other 3 arteries to flow around the loop and still feed the part of the brain that the blocked artery was supposed to serve.
Theoretically. You say that with a bit of skepticism.
Well, because in a perfect textbook world, yes, it works perfectly. But in reality, the circle of Willis is often incomplete. Many people have narrow connecting vessels.
Ah, so it's not always a superhighway.
Right. In older adults, those communicating arteries might be too stiff or too small to handle the full load of a major blockage. So while it is a safety net, it's not fail-safe.
Okay.
But there's a detail in Ganong that I find just fascinating regarding the physics of flow within this circle.
This was the dye experiment, right? I found this really counterintuitive.
It is. You would think that because the arteries all connect, the blood just mixes together like soup in a pot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if you inject a dye into the left carotid artery, it almost exclusively stains the left hemisphere of the brain. It doesn't cross over to the right.
But the road is open. Why doesn't it cross?
Pressure balance.
Okay.
The pressure coming up the right carotid is exactly the same as the pressure coming up the left. So they push against each other equally at the junction. It creates a functional barrier.
So they're in a standoff.
A perfect standoff. The blood stays in its lane because the pressure from the other side prevents it from crossing.
So normally everyone stays in their lane. It's only in a crisis that you cross the median.
Exactly. If the left carotid gets blocked, the pressure on the left side drops to near 0. Suddenly, the pressure on the right is much higher, and that pressure gradient is what drives the blood across the circle to save the starving hemisphere.
So it's passive. The system relies on physics, not decisions.
That's the elegance of it.
That is elegant. Now, once the blood gets to the brain tissue, we encounter another unique feature. The brain isn't just sitting there in the skull. It's floating.
This brings us to the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. And this isn't just some, waste system. It solves a massive structural engineering problem.
Problem of weight.
Correct. We said the brain weighs about 1,400 grams. That's roughly 3 pounds.
Right.
Imagine a 3-pound block of soft tofu. If you set that on a hard table, what happens?
It flattens. It just squashes itself under its own weight.
Right. The brain is incredibly soft.
Yeah.
If it just sat on the hard base of the skull, the bottom layers would be crushed, the blood vessels would be pinched shut, and the delicate cranial nerves would be severed.
So the body applies Archimedes' principle.
Precisely. The brain is suspended in a water bath of CSF. And because the specific gravity of the brain and the CSF are almost identical, the brain floats.
So what does that do to its weight?
Its effective weight inside the skull is reduced from 1,400 grams down to about 50 grams.
50. From 1,400.
50.
So it goes from 3 pounds to barely an ounce and a half.
Which allows it to hang from those delicate nerve roots and blood vessels without tearing them. It's brilliant.
And it does more than just that. This fluid system explains one of the most confusing types of head injuries, right? The Contra-coup injury.
Ah, yes, the Contra-coup.
This is when you get hit on the front of the head, but the injury, the bruise, is on the back of the brain. I never quite understood the physics of that until I read Guyton's explanation. It feels like magic.
It does, but it's just Newton's laws. Here's the visualization. The skull is a rigid box. It's filled with fluid and the brain.
Uh-huh.
And fluid is incompressible.
Okay.
So imagine you get hit in the forehead. The skull moves backward instantly.
Right, skull moves back.
Now, the fluid at the front of the skull, right where the impact happened, cannot be compressed.
Yeah.
So as the skull moves back, that fluid pushes the front of the brain backward in perfect unison with the skull.
So the front of the brain is actually cushioned by that fluid pressure. It kind of rides the wave.
Exactly. But now look at the back of the head. The skull is moving away from the brain. The brain has inertia. It wants to stay where it was. This creates a momentary separation, a vacuum between the back of the brain and the back of the skull.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
That vacuum collapses violently. We call it cavitation. The brain snaps back to fill the void and slams into the rear of the skull.
So the hit was in the front, but the real damage happened at the back.
That is the contre coup. The hit was in the front, but the vacuum caused the brain to impact the back of the skull.
That is fascinating and also terrifying. It really shows that while the fluid protects, physics still applies.
Oh, absolutely. Now, speaking of this fluid, we need to talk about where it comes from because it's not just stagnant water. It's a dynamic production line.
It's produced in the choroid plexus, right? These like cauliflower-looking growths in the ventricles.
Yes, but here's the key mechanism. It's not just filtering blood like the kidney does. The choroid plexus actively secretes. The epithelial cells actively pump sodium ions, Na plus Fe, into the ventricle.
And in physiology, the golden rule is where sodium goes.
Water follows. The positive sodium pulls negative chloride ions along with it, creating salt. That increases the osmotic pressure, and water rushes in through the tissue to balance it all out.
And that's CSF.
That's how you make CSF. It flows down through the ventricles out into the space around the brain and eventually gets absorbed back into the blood through these little one-way valves called arachnoid villi.
And this flow is crucial. If it gets blocked, you have a problem.
A huge problem. We call it hydrocephalus, or water on the brain.
Mhm.
If the drain is clogged, say, the arachnoid villi get gummed up by debris from an infection or a bleed, the fluid just keeps being made.
Because the pump doesn't stop.
That sodium pump doesn't know when to stop. So pressure builds up. In a baby whose skull bones haven't fused yet, the head actually expands.
But in an adult, the skull is a solid bone box. It doesn't expand.
And this leads us directly to the most critical concept in neurophysiology, the Monroe-Kelly doctrine.
This sounds like a legal treaty, but it's actually a volume problem.
It is the rule that dictates everything in the cranium. The skull is rigid. Inside that box, you have three things: brain tissue, blood, and CSF.
And that's it.
That's it. And since the box cannot stretch, the total volume of those three things must remain constant.
Volume of brain plus volume of blood plus volume of CSF equals a constant?
Exactly. It's a zero-sum game. If you develop a brain tumor, that's an increase in tissue volume. Or if you have a bleed, that's an increase in blood volume. There is no extra room. Something else has to leave to make space.
What leaves first?
The body compensates by squeezing out the CSF and the venous blood. They're the low-pressure, compressible components. This buys you some time.
But only some.
Right. Once those are squeezed out, if the mass keeps growing, the pressure skyrockets. And eventually, the pressure inside the skull becomes higher than the pressure in the arteries trying to get in.
And if arterial pressure is overcome, blood flow stops.
And the brain dies. This is why intracranial pressure, or ICP, is such a vital, vital sign.
Okay, but there's a fascinating flip side to this pressure relationship. The sources mention how this closed box system actually helps pilots pulling high G-forces.
I loved this detail. It's the only time having your head in a vise is a good thing.
Right, explain that.
Okay, think about a fighter pilot pulling out of a dive. They're experiencing positive G-force. Gravity is trying to pull all the arterial blood out of their head and down into their feet.
Which would normally make them black out.
Right, because their arterial pressure in the brain would drop. But they don't, at least not immediately. Why?
The box.
The box, because of the Monroe-Kelly doctrine. Gravity pulls the arterial blood down, yes, but gravity also pulls the CSF and the venous blood down toward the spine.
Ah, so the pressure inside the box drops too.
Exactly. The intracranial pressure drops in parallel with the arterial pressure. So because the pressure outside the cerebral blood vessels, the CSF pressure drops, the vessels don't collapse. The gradient for flow is maintained.
It's a brilliant passive compensation mechanism.
It's like the system balances its own books.
Okay, let's move to the gates of the fortress. The blood-brain barrier, the BBB.
The gatekeeper. This is what separates the brain from the chaos of the rest of the body.
In most of the body, capillaries are leaky, right? They have fenestrations, little windows where things can just drift in and out.
Yeah, they're designed for exchange,
Hmm.
but not in the brain.
What's different?
In the brain, the endothelial cells that make up the capillary walls are stitched together by tight junctions. It's like they're welded shut.
Yeah.
But it's not just the vessel itself, it's the neighbors. You have these cells called astrocytes, glial cells, that wrap their end feet around the capillary.
I love that term end feet. It implies they are literally standing on the blood vessels.
We essentially are. And for a long time, we thought the astrocytes were just physical support, just scaffolding.
But they do more.
So much more. We now know they send chemical signals that induce the capillaries to form those tight junctions. If you take a brain capillary and put it in a petri dish without astrocytes, it becomes leaky. It loses its barrier properties.
So the barrier is an active maintenance project. So who gets in? Who has the key?
It depends on physics again,
Yes.
specifically lipid solubility. The cell membrane is a lipid bilayer. It's fat.
Right.
So substances that dissolve in fat can walk right through the wall. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, alcohol, anesthetics.
That explains why a glass of wine affects your head so fast. It just bypasses the security.
It walks right through the walls. But what about the stuff the brain actually needs to eat?
Glucose.
Glucose.
Yeah.
Glucose is water soluble. It cannot pass the lipid membrane. It just bounces off.
So the brain is locked inside a room with no doors, but it needs food. How does it eat?
So it builds a special door. The brain capillaries are studded with specialized transporters, GLUT1 transporters.
Okay.
Think of them like a revolving door that only fits a glucose molecule. They grab glucose from the blood and physically carry it across the barrier.
And unlike the glucose transporters in muscle, these don't require insulin, right?
Correct. That is a vital distinction. Muscle needs insulin to open the door for sugar. The brain does not.
Why is that so important?
If the brain needed insulin, then every time you were between meals and your insulin dropped, you would go into a coma. The GLUT1 transporter is always open for business, provided there's sugar in the blood.
But the sources mention a clinical correlation here with infants involving these transporters.
Yes, this is a rare but devastating condition. If a baby is born with a genetic defect in these GLUT1 transporters, the revolving door is broken.
So the glucose can't get in.
Right, their blood sugar is normal. But if you do a spinal tap, their spinal fluid sugar is incredibly low. The brain is starving in the midst of plenty.
And that causes
Intractable seizures and severe developmental delays. It's a tragic illustration of how critical this transport system is.
So the barrier keeps things out, but it also has to pump things out.
Right. It's not just a wall, it's a bouncer. There is a molecule called P-glycoprotein. It's an efflux pump.
Efflux, so it pumps out.
It pumps out. If a drug or toxin manages to sneak into the endothelial cell, P-glycoprotein grabs it and throws it back into the blood.
Which is great for natural toxins, but terrible for medicine.
Exactly. This is a huge, huge challenge in treating brain tumors. You might have a chemotherapy drug that kills cancer cells beautifully in a dish, but you give it to the patient.
And P-glycoprotein just throws it out.
And throws it out before it can even reach the tumor. It effectively shields the cancer.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the body is not a democracy, but even within the brain, there are exceptions to the keep everything out rule.
Right.
There are leaks in the fortress.
The circumventricular organs. These are small, specific areas of the brain located near the ventricles that deliberately lack a blood-brain barrier.
Why leave the door unlocked in such a secure facility? It seems like a design flaw.
Because the brain needs to taste the blood. It needs to know what's going on out there. If you are completely walled off, you're blind.
Okay.
Take the area postrema, for example. It sits right at the bottom of the fourth ventricle. It's a chemoreceptor trigger zone.
What is it tasting for?
Toxins. If you eat a poisonous berry, the toxins get into your blood. They can't get into the main cortex, but they can get into the area postrema.
And then what?
When that area detects the toxin, it immediately triggers the vomiting reflex.
So if I get food poisoning, that's my area postrema saving my life by emptying my stomach.
Precisely. Or take the OVLT, the organum vasculosum of the lamina terminalis.
What does that one do?
It tastes the blood to see how salty it is, the osmolarity. If you're dehydrated, your salt concentration goes up. The OVLT senses it and tells the hypothalamus to make you thirsty and to release antidiuretic hormone.
You can't regulate what you can't measure.
Exactly. So these leaky spots are essential sensing ports.
Okay, let's talk about regulation. We know the brain is greedy. How does it make sure it gets what it wants? The book talks about metabolic control.
This is the primary driver. The brain cares about three things chemically: carbon dioxide, hydrogen ions, and oxygen. but the master regulators are CO2 and hydrogen ions.
Why CO2? I always think of oxygen as the important one.
Oxygen is critical, but CO2 is the signal, because high CO2 is proxy for hard work. If neurons are firing, they're burning glucose and producing CO2 as waste. Also, CO2 mixes with water to form carbonic acid, which releases hydrogen ions. It makes things acidic.
And the brain hates acid.
Hates it. Acid messes up neuronal firing. So if CO2 or acid levels rise, the blood vessels in that area dilate massively.
To flush the toilet?
Essentially, yes. The dilation brings in fresh blood to wash the CO2 and acid away, restoring the pH so the neurons can keep working properly.
This explains why if you hyperventilate, breathe really fast, you get busy. I always thought it was because I was getting too much oxygen.
That's a really common misconception. It's actually the opposite. When you hyperventilate, you blow off too much CO2.
So your blood CO2 drops.
It drops. The brain vessels detect that low CO2 and conclude, oh, metabolism must be low, we don't need all this flow, and they constrict.
So I'm strangling my own brain.
You are causing cerebral vasoconstriction. You get dizzy because you are actually reducing blood flow to the brain by breathing too much.
That is wild. Now let's connect the neurons to the vessels. Neurovascular coupling. This sounds like the astrocytes again.
It is. This is the how. How does the vessel know the neuron is working? We used to think astrocytes were just glue.
Right, the support cells.
The Guyton describes a mechanism where the astrocyte has 1 foot on the neuron synapse and 1 foot on the blood vessel.
It's a bridge.
A sensor. When the neuron fires, it releases the neurotransmitter glutamate. The astrocyte detects that glutamate. It triggers a calcium wave inside the astrocyte, which travels down to the end foot on the blood vessel.
And then?
The astrocyte then releases vasodilators like nitric oxide or arachidonic acid metabolites directly onto the smooth muscle of the artery.
It's like a waiter watching your water glass. As soon as you take a sip, they are right there to refill it.
It's a perfect description. The supply is perfectly coupled to the demand, almost instantaneously.
Then there is autoregulation. This is the idea that the brain keeps its blood flow constant even if your blood pressure swings wildly.
Within limits, yes. If we plotted a graph with mean arterial pressure on the bottom and cerebral blood flow on the side, it would look like a plateau.
A flat line.
A flat line. Between a pressure of about 65 and 140 millimeters of mercury, cerebral blood flow is rock steady. It doesn't budge.
So if my pressure spikes to 130 because I'm lifting weights, my brain doesn't just get flooded with blood.
Right. The vessels constrict to counter the high pressure. And if your pressure drops to 70, the vessels dilate to keep flow up. It's a self-regulating system.
But there is a trap here for people with chronic high blood pressure. The right shift.
This is a crucial clinical concept. If you have chronic hypertension, say your pressure is always 180 over 100, your blood vessels physically change.
They adapt.
Their muscular walls get thicker to handle the stress, and the whole autoregulation curve shifts to the right.
So they get used to the high pressure.
Yes. But that means their low limit is also higher. A healthy person can tolerate a drop to a mean pressure of 65. But a hypertensive patient might start suffering ischemia stroke-like symptoms at a mean pressure of 120.
120 is considered normal.
Normal for you or me. But for their adapted brain, a 120 feels like severe hypotension. If you lower their blood pressure too fast in an emergency room, trying to fix the number, you can actually cause a stroke because their vessels have forgotten how to dilate at those normal pressures.
That is where the nuance of physiology really matters. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the history of the system.
Exactly. The context changes the rules.
Okay, let's leave the fortress of the brain and move to the engine room, the coronary circulation.
The heart. The organ that feeds the entire body, but presents a unique paradox. It has to feed itself first.
And the paradox is mechanical, isn't it? The heart pumps blood by squeezing, but the blood vessels that feed the heart muscle go through the heart muscle.
This is systolic squeeze.
Yeah.
This is the defining feature of coronary flow. Think about the left ventricle. It has to generate huge pressure, 120 millimillimeter Hg or more, to push blood into the aorta.
Right.
To do that, the muscle contracts violently.
Which crushes the blood vessels inside the muscle wall.
Completely. During systole, the contraction phase blood flow to the subendocardium, which is the inner layer of the left ventricle, drops to zero. It might even flow backward.
So the heart is holding its breath every time it beats.
The left ventricle is, yes. The right ventricle doesn't generate enough pressure to crush its own vessels, so it gets flow all the time. But for the all-important left ventricle, it can only eat during diastole, the relaxation phase.
This seems like a terrible design flaw. If the vessels ran on the surface, they wouldn't get crushed.
Well, the major arteries do run on the surface, on the epicardium, but they have to dive deep into the muscle to feed the inner layers. And that's where the physics of wall tension comes in.
Okay.
According to the law of Laplace, the tension is highest on the inner curvature, the subendocardium. So that inner layer works the hardest and needs the most oxygen, but it gets squeezed the tightest.
It's the perfect storm for ischemia.
It creates huge vulnerabilities. Think about what happens when your heart rate goes up, tachycardia.
Well, the heart is working harder, so it needs more oxygen.
Correct. But mechanically, when the heart beats faster, the cardiac cycle shortens. But it shortens mostly by cutting the time spent in diastole. Systole stays about the same length.
So the resting time, the eating time, gets cut.
Exactly. The faster the heart beats, the more oxygen it demands, but the less time it has to receive that oxygen. It's a double whammy. Demand goes up, the supply window closes.
This explains why a stress test can trigger angina. You're pushing the heart into that danger zone where supply can't meet demand.
Precisely. And if you add aortic stenosis to the mix, a narrowed valve, the ventricle has to generate even higher pressures to push blood out. That means even more compression to the coronaries.
Pushing it right to the brink.
Right to the brink of starvation.
Let's talk about regulation. The heart is also a metabolic glutton, right?
The biggest. At rest, the heart extracts 70 to 80% of the oxygen from the blood delivered to it.
Whoa. Most tissues only take what, like 25%?
Correct. Your bicep takes a sip and passes the cup along. The heart drains the cup.
And that's critical why?
Because it means the heart has no extraction reserve. If it needs more oxygen, it can't just extract more. It's already taking it all.
So the only way the heart can get more oxygen is to increase blood flow.
Vasodilation is life or death for the heart. And the mechanism is beautiful. It's metabolic dominance.
What is the signal? What tells it to dilate?
Adenosine.
Adenosine.
When heart muscle cells work hard and run low on ATP, their energy currency, they start breaking down the ATP molecule itself. One of the breakdown products is adenosine.
And adenosine is a vasodilator.
A potent one. The adenosine leaks out of the muscle cell, hits the nearby blood vessel, and says, open up. It is a distress flare.
We're burning fuel faster than we're getting it.
Send more fuel, send more oxygen.
But here is where I get confused. The heart has sympathetic nerves, the fight or flight nerves. Usually sympathetic nerves constrict blood vessels.
Right.
If I'm running from a tiger, shouldn't my vessels constrict? That seems wrong.
You found the neural paradox. The coronary arteries do have alpha receptors, which constrict, and beta receptors, which dilate. But the direct neural signal from the sympathetic nervous system is technically vasoconstriction from the alpha receptors.
So if a tiger chases me, my nervous system tries to constrict my coronary arteries, that sounds like suicide.
It would be. But remember the hierarchy. The metabolic signal is king. When the sympathetic nerves fire, they also make the heart beat harder and faster. That massive increase in work creates a massive metabolic demand. Adenosine, potassium, and CO2 flood the tissue.
And the chemical signal overpowers the neural signal.
It crushes it. We call it functional sympatholysis. The metabolic vasodilation completely overrides the direct neural constriction. It's a safety override.
So the heart forces its own vessels open no matter what the nerves say.
In real life, yes. The heart's needs always win.
And when the system fails, we get a heart attack.
Myocardial infarction. And notice where it starts. The subendocardium. The inner lining.
The part that gets squeezed the hardest.
Exactly. It's the furthest from the blood supply and under the highest pressure. It is the canary in the coal mine.
The sources mention some cool imaging tech related to this. Thallium versus technetium scans. This helps visualize that flow.
It helps us distinguish dead tissue from ischemic or stunned tissue.
Okay, how does that work?
Thallium-201 is a potassium analog. The sodium-potassium pump, which only works in living cells, pulls it into healthy cells. So if you take a picture, the healthy heart lights up, the dead spot, the infarct, looks cold as a cold spot scan.
And technetium.
Technetium 99-meter pyrophosphate binds to calcium. When cells die, their membranes break and calcium floods in from the outside. The calcium crystallizes in the dying mitochondria, so the technetium binds to the dead tissue.
So the dead part lights up.
The infarct lights up as a hot spot.
That is a great memory anchor. Thallium is for the living. Technetium is for the dead.
A bit morbid, but medically accurate.
Okay, let's cool things down. Part 3. The cutaneous circulation. The skin.
The radiator.
You said earlier the skin isn't selfish. It works for the greater good.
It does. The skin's own metabolic needs are tiny. It can survive on very little blood flow, but its capacity for flow is enormous.
What's the range?
It can range from 1 milliliter per minute up to 150 milliliters per 100 grams of tissue. That is a 150-fold increase.
Why does it need that huge range?
To dump heat. We have these specialized structures in our fingers, toes, and ears called arteriovenous anastomoses, AV shunts.
Shunts, so they're bypasses.
They're trapdoors. Think of them like a bypass valve. Normally, blood goes artery to capillary to vein. The AV anastomosis connects the artery directly to the vein, bypassing the capillaries completely.
Why bypass the capillary? Isn't that where exchange happens?
Yes, but capillaries are slow. If you want to move a lot of hot blood from the core to the surface quickly, you need a high-flow, low-resistance pipe.
Ah, I see.
When you're hot, these trapdoors fling open. Warm arterial blood rushes into the venous plexus of the skin, and the heat radiates out into the air.
And when you're cold?
The trapdoor slams shut. The blood stays deep in the core to keep your vital organs warm. The skin becomes insulation.
This explains why your fingers are the first thing to go numb in the winter. The body is sacrificing the extremities to save the core.
It's the meritocracy again. Fingers are useful, but the liver and heart are essential.
There's a really cool phenomenon described in Ganong called the triple response. It's basically what happens if you scratch your arm with a key.
The scratch test. It reveals the layers of regulation beautifully.
Walk me through it.
Okay, so phase 1 is the red reaction. You scratch, and within about 10 seconds, you get a red line. That is simple capillary dilation from the direct physical pressure.
Okay, simple enough.
Phase 2 is the wheel. The line swells up. That's local edema from histamine release, making the capillaries leaky.
But phase 3 is the weird one, the flare.
The flare. The redness spreads widely around the scratch, not just on the line. And this is caused by something called the axon reflex.
Walk us through this, because the book implies it breaks the rules of neurology.
It kind of does. Usually a nerve signal goes one way, from the skin to the spinal cord, that's orthodromic conduction, forward.
Okay, standard procedure.
But here, the sensory nerve gets stimulated by the scratch. The signal starts going up toward the spine as usual. But at a branch point in the nerve, the signal takes a U-turn. It travels back down another branch of the same nerve fiber, heading toward a nearby blood vessel.
Antidromic conduction. It's flowing backward.
Exactly. It travels back down to the blood vessel and releases neuropeptides like substance P or CGRP. These cause massive dilation.
So it's a local reflex loop that doesn't even use the spinal cord?
It happens entirely within the sensory nerve branches.
That is wild. It's like the nerve is talking to itself. Hey, we got hit over here. Open the floodgates over there.
It allows the skin to mount a defense inflammation immediately, without waiting for orders from central command. It's decentralized governance.
One last thing on skin color. We see people turn red. We see them turn blue. What's the physiology there?
It's about the combination of flow and dilation. If you are red and warm, like after exercise, your arterioles are wide open, so flow is fast, and your capillaries are also open. That's oxygenated blood rushing through.
And blue. Cyanosis.
Cyanosis happens when the flow is slow.
Yeah.
If it's cold, the arterioles constrict. Blood trickles into the capillaries. Because it's moving so slowly, the tissue has time to strip all the oxygen out.
So the blood stagnates.
And the hemoglobin becomes deoxygenated, which is a blue-purple color. Stagnant blood turns blue. Fast blood stays red.
Got it. All right, final frontier. And this one is literally an alien world. The fetal circulation.
The temporary system. We have to completely shift our thinking here. The fetus has a unique problem. It has lungs, but they don't work.
They're just placeholders.
They are. They're solid, full of fluid, and the vessels are clamped shut. So it has to use a proxy lung, the placenta.
But the placenta isn't as good as real lungs.
It's actually quite inefficient. The blood coming from the placenta is only about 80% saturated with oxygen. By adult standards, that is severe hypoxia. You'd be on a ventilator.
So the fetus is living on Mount Everest. How does it survive?
It uses a molecular trick. Fetal hemoglobin, or HbF.
The oxygen thief.
It effectively is. Adult hemoglobin binds to a molecule called 2A3-DPG. This molecule essentially tells hemoglobin, hey, loosen your grip, let the oxygen go to the tissues.
Okay.
Fetal hemoglobin basically ignores 2A3-DPG.
So it holds onto oxygen tighter.
Much, much tighter. So when the mother's blood with adult HB meets the fetal blood with fetal HB in the placenta, the fetal HB rips the oxygen right off the maternal HB. It shifts the equilibrium.
So it can load up on oxygen even when there isn't much around.
Exactly. But getting oxygen is only half the battle. You have to distribute it. And the fetus has a plumbing problem. The lungs are closed for business.
Right. In an adult, the right heart pumps to the lungs, lungs to the left heart. It's a series circuit.
But in the fetus, because the lungs are a high-resistance roadblock, It has to work in parallel. It uses 3 shunts to bypass the blockages.
Let's trace a drop of blood. It comes from the placenta, full of oxygen and food, up the umbilical vein. First stop, the liver.
The fetus says, I don't need to filter this. Mom just did that for me. So we have bypass number 1, the ductus venosus. It shunts the blood around the liver directly into the inferior vena cava.
So now we are in the IVC, heading to the heart. But the IVC also has deoxygenated blood coming from the fetus's legs. Does it just mix into a soup?
No, and this is a detail people miss. It's the streaming effect. The right atrium isn't just a big bag. There's a ridge of tissue that acts like a traffic cop.
A flow splitter.
It takes that high-speed, oxygen-rich stream coming from the ductus venosus and aims it like a fire hose directly at a hole in the wall.
The foramen oval.
The foramen oval,
Bypass
number
shunt.
2. The hole between the right atrium and the left atrium.
So the best blood skips the right side of the heart.
It skips the right ventricle entirely. It goes right atrium, through the hole, to the left atrium, then to the left ventricle, then to the aorta. And what are the first branches of the aorta?
The carotids, to the brain.
Bingo. The fetus takes the absolute best blood available and sends it straight to the brain and the heart muscle. The head gets the premium fuel.
And the bad stuff. The deoxygenated blood coming back from the brain.
That comes down from the head via the superior vena cava. That stream falls past the foramen ovale and lands in the right ventricle. It gets pumped toward the lungs.
But the lungs are blocked.
They're high resistance. They push back. So the blood needs an escape hatch.
Bypass number 3.
Bypass 3. The ductus arteriosus. It's a massive vessel connecting the pulmonary artery directly to the aorta. The blood takes the path of least resistance, flowing through the ductus, bypassing the lungs and entering the descending aorta.
Which feeds the lower body and goes back to the placenta, so the brain gets the steak and the feet get the scraps.
Precisely. It's a masterpiece of triage.
And then comes the most dramatic moment in physiology. Birth. The first breath. This is a hydraulic revolution.
It is a cataclysmic shift. Let's break it down into pressure. In utero, pulmonary vascular resistance is high because the lungs are clamped. Systemic vascular resistance is low because the placenta is a big, easy circuit to flow through.
Okay, high in the lungs, low in the body.
Birth happens. The cord is clamped.
You remove the low-resistance placenta, so systemic resistance skyrocket.
Right. SVR shoots up. The left heart now has to pump against a wall. Pressure in the aorta and left ventricle rises.
Okay.
Simultaneously, the baby gasps. The lungs expand with air for the first time. Oxygen enters the alveoli. This triggers the release of bradykinin and stops what's called hypoxic vasoconstriction.
And pulmonary resistance crashes.
It drops like a stone. It falls to less than 20% of its fetal value. Suddenly, it is way easier for blood to go to the lungs than through the ductus arteriosus.
So blood rushes into the lungs.
Yes, and that blood has to come back to the heart.
To the left atrium.
Yes. A massive volume of blood returns from the now open lungs to the left atrium. This raises the pressure in the left atrium way up.
And now the math has changed.
The math is flipped. Left atrial pressure is now high. Right atrial pressure is low.
Which pushes the flap of the foramen oval shut.
Slam. The one-way valve closes. The shunt is gone.
And what about the other shunt?
The ductus arteriosus. The high oxygen levels in the blood and the loss of prostaglandins, which were coming from the placenta, caused the smooth muscle in the ductus to strangle itself. It constricts and closes functionally within hours.
In minutes, the circulation switches from parallel to series.
It transforms from an aquatic creature to a terrestrial one. It is a miracle of engineering.
I want to leave the listener with one thought, something the sources hinted at regarding the placental transfusion. We talk about clamping the cord, but there's a modern push for delayed cord clamping.
Yes, this is a fascinating application of this physiology. If you clamp immediately, you leave a significant volume of the baby's own blood behind in the placenta.
Stranded.
Right, but if you wait 1 to 3 minutes, the uterus contracts and squeezes that blood into the baby.
It's a top-up.
It is. It provides extra iron, extra red blood cells, and extra volume, which helps stabilize that massive hemodynamic transition we just described. It smooths out the shock of the system switch.
So bringing this all together, we started by saying the body is a meritocracy.
And look at the evidence. The brain. It gets constancy, it gets protection, it gets the first cut of the budget, and it has the power to override the rest of the body to keep its pH stable.
Right.
The heart. It feeds itself based on how hard it works, even if it has to crush its own supply lines to do it.
Right.
It uses metabolic override to ensure survival.
The skin.
The skin is the altruist. It sacrifices its comfort for the core temperature, using these rule-breaking nerve reflexes to manage the environment.
And the fetus.
The fetus rigs the entire plumbing system with shunts and flow splitters to ensure the brain gets the only good oxygen available.
It's not fair, but it works.
Fairness in biology is extinction. Appropriateness is survival.
Physiology in action. All right, we have covered a massive amount of ground, from the circle of Willis to the placental shunt.
A lot of territory.
As always, this is just a guide. You have to read the chapters. Ganong sections on special regions, and Guyton's chapter on cerebral, coronary, and fetal flow. The diagrams of the fetal circulation and the autoregulation curves are things you really need to see with your own eyes to grasp them.
Absolutely. The text has the nuance and the graphs that we can only summarize. Don't sift the reading.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.
Take care.